Do you have a general idea about how long you're going to have for questions? Do you have a general idea about how long you're going to have for questions? Oh, I think we're live.
I think about 5 minutes.
Perfect. Well, we are live. So, welcome to AAC in the Cloud 2020. I'm proud to have Endever here. They're going to be talking about AAC backups and backups for backups, even better. So, I'm going to turn the time over to Endever to introduce themselves.
Can you hear me okay? Hi there, my name is Endever Corbin and my pronouns are they, them, theirs, or z, them, theirs. I'm a mostly non-speaking autistic here to talk to you today about AAC backups, or in other words, styles of communication you fall back on when your primary mode of communicating isn't a good option. For a little more about me, I've been using formal AAC since 2017, and informal solutions about as long as I can remember. At this point I speak maybe 25% of the time, and the rest of the time I use sign language, the apps Proloco2Go and Proloco for text, and sometimes light text supports I designed. I love being a multimodal communicator, and I like to think of myself as creative and crafty, so I'm excited to do this session with you. I'm intending it to be useful for AAC users as well as professionals, families, and support people, so please get comfortable and feel free to ask any questions relevant to your specific situation. Slides are freely available, so you can toggle through at your own pace and click the links that have been integrated into the file. If you're having trouble understanding my device, everything I'm saying aloud for each slide is in the notes section. And generally to speak to not just my own experience as an AAC user, but also friends and other AAC users I know of. My content is going to include a lot of long descriptive lists, because I really want you to come away with a grasp of how many possible solutions are out there that might fit your situation. As for a rough outline, first I'm going to talk about what I mean by AAC backups and the various reasons you might want to use them in different situations. Then I'll go over ideas for the most portable AAC methods I know of so that you have the option of actually wearing communication support as a backup. And lastly, I'll cover ideas for working communication supports into your environment so that you always have a backup option nearby even if you're not carrying any AAC with you. There should be time at the end where I can answer your questions. First of all, what is an AAC backup? Perhaps the first thing you think when you hear that term is a high-tech AAC user who has a paper printout of their device's layout set up in a binder, but this is only one possible permutation of what I'm referring to. Truly any form of AAC can be your backup. It just depends on what your primary communication method is. In fact, many people only use AAC as their backup because speech is their primary communication method. Or for that matter, you might consider speech your backup. So keep in mind that any of the communication supports I discussed today as backup methods could instead be your primary method of communication. But for this session we'll just be discussing them when used as backups. And of course we'll be focusing on AAC rather than speech. But always remember that many AAC users only use AAC part-time. Here are a couple of examples besides the binder printout of a device's layout to get you started thinking about your options. If your primary method is a high-tech app on an iPad, your first backup could be the same app on your phone. Or if your primary method is direct selection on a letterboard, maybe your favorite backup is partner-assisted scanning. Now, it's worth noting that not all of us have only one single method we consider our primary. Personally, American Sign Language, Proloco2Go, and Proloco for text are all options I would consider the primary methods I use most often. But even if you regularly switch between multiple primary methods, it can be useful to plan yet another AAC method as your backup. For me, that's mainly letterboarding. When I polled a small group of AAC users on Facebook who consider a high-tech app or device one of their primary AAC methods, most people said that the backup they use most frequently is a different app or device, but several other respondents had different answers as to what they use as a backup most often. These included non-linguistic gestures, handwriting, non-linguistic sounds, sign language, hard copy symbols or words boards, and communication cards. And I guess if you include my answer, you could add letterboards to that list. So how do you choose a backup method? The main way to decide what backups are going to work for you is to consider the situations you might need them in. There are a ton of those possible situations, and thus many reasons you should prepare backups. Of course, when we're first looking into AAC and trying to select a primary method, it's easy to only consider the most current, most frequent, or most ideal circumstances we might need to communicate in. But upon further consideration, for most AAC users, there is no single communication method that will work for us 100% of the time. Many of our disabilities mean we experience fluctuating internal impairments, and it's likely our external circumstances are also constantly in flux. I did another informal Facebook survey of a larger group of AAC users to ask what sort of factors go into our need to use or our decision to use backup AAC methods, and collectively we thought of almost 40 examples. First, I'll list the fluctuating impairments we identified from most commonly selected to least common, covering both body-based impairments and brain-based impairments, although that distinction is fairly arbitrary. We might use a backup AAC method due to meltdowns or shutdowns, autistic burnout, flashbacks or trauma response, executive dysfunction such as inertia or difficulty transitioning between tasks, physical fatigue, sensory needs, motor control issues, panic attacks, migraines, brain fog, selective mutism, seizures, muscle spasms, headmates switching out for people who are plural, miscellaneous mental health crises, anticipation of changes in functioning, concussions, bipolar or psychotic episodes, or tics such as Tourette syndrome. As you can see, our bodies and brains are so variable. For me, I'm an autistic with motor skills issues and co-occurring mental illness, so I know there's a certain set of fluctuating impairments I need to consider, but each AAC user is going to have a different combination of factors to take into account depending on which disabilities they have. If you're a support person for an AAC user, please don't assume you know what those factors are for them. Ask directly what they consider the important impairments that impact their communication and how those impairments change from day to day or hour to hour. If they don't have a way of answering an open-ended question like that, you can try presenting the conversation in the form of multiple choice questions or yes/no questions. The more you learn and understand about their subjective experience of how their disabilities affect communication, the more you'll be able to help them select and access backup methods that meet their needs at different times. Then there's the external circumstances that affect our need to use or choice to use AAC backups. Again, I'll list these from most commonly selected in my informal Facebook poll to the least common. You'll see that these determining factors include aspects of the physical environment around us as well as our social environment and other situational determinants. We might use a backup method due to background noise, the familiarity of our communication partner, the expectations of people around us, the role of our communication partner in our life, availability of needed vocabulary, the general type of conversation, being in a medical or hospital situation, others' biases, how much charge is left on our devices, the specific communicative function we're going for, random snow and other water exposure, not wanting the bright light of a tablet in the dark, forgetting to bring our primary AAC method with us, our location, how much time other people in the conversation are giving us to express ourselves, competing access needs within ourselves or between us and other people, bright glare from sunlight or overhead lighting, availability of support staff, our positioning, how information heavy the conversation is, and whether we want the conversation recorded. All that said, there are probably even more environmental factors we didn't think of. And finally, even when all other circumstances are ideal, sometimes our first attempts at communication just don't work. Maybe our voice output device isn't understandable to our listener. They can't follow our letterboarding. They don't know our signs. They can't read our handwriting. They don't understand our spoken word approximations or facial expressions, or any other number of miscommunications can happen in our day-to-day lives. This is when it's especially helpful to be a confident multimodal communicator so that you can switch smoothly into another AAC method to repair the misunderstanding. If it doesn't cause undue hardship, I do recommend practicing switching between your various communication methods regularly even when not absolutely necessary, because it prepares you for times you will need to switch in order to turn a confused conversation into a successful one. It is normal even between two speaking conversants for communication to break down, and as AAC users we have a unique opportunity to prepare for these circumstances by getting creative about what communication methods we are practiced at using. For example, I have friends who prefer to use their speaking abilities when possible, but when unfamiliar people can't understand their atypical pronunciation, they find it really helpful to know their way around a communication device in order to fill in the gaps. Similarly, when other hearing people can't understand my finger spelling or signs, it helps to be skilled at letterboarding. So I definitely encourage you to not just prep AAC backup methods and set them aside, but to actually practice using them. And start to challenge your own ideas of what counts as AAC and what counts as communication, because the more open to unconventional AAC methods you become, the more prepared you will be for communication repair scenarios. Now, the precise way that any of the contributing factors we talked about impact which specific backup system you prefer can be really highly variable too, so I can't go over all possibilities, but I want to give you several examples so you can start to think about how each different factor you might personally experience could affect what choices you make. For times you're exposed to water or other liquid, such as in the rain or snow, bathing or swimming, and cooking or eating, you might choose light tech supports like core boards that are laminated rather than an expensive device that isn't 100% waterproof. Personally, I have a case on my device that is supposedly waterproof, but I'm still overly paranoid about it potentially breaking. So if I'm out and about in my rainy city, I'm likely to switch to a laminated letterboard. During a meltdown, brain fog, autistic burnout, or mental health crisis, some people have an easier time navigating a symbols-based AAC method than their usual spelling-based communication. This is definitely true for me when I'm coming out of meltdown or shutdown. I'd much rather use Proloco to go than a QWERTY layout typing app. Another sort of backup method for these same circumstances is, if you normally communicate in full sentences, you should totally give yourself permission to switch to using whatever kind of vocabulary and grammar comes easiest to you at any moment. Contrary to what grammar sticklers profess, there is actually nothing wrong with stringing words together in unusual ways, and even if your default is proper English, I think you're allowed to consider single stray words your backup method. I have totally said things like, have meltdown hard communicate, and there's nothing wrong with that. Any phrasing that gets your message across is the right way to communicate, and I hope you won't let anyone tell you otherwise. I super recommend hanging out with other AAC users as much as possible, because in my experience we tend to be more forgiving of divergent use of language like this than the average speaking person is. Okay, some briefer examples. If your device runs out of batteries, you don't have access to a charger or outlet, and there's an emergent situation you need to communicate in, you might utilize wearable AAC to get basic ideas across. I usually use bracelets for this, but we'll talk through a ton more ideas for wearable AAC in a few minutes. If you usually use sign language, you might switch to handwriting on scratch paper for communication partners who aren't fluent. This is also a familiar situation for deaf people. While in a noisy coffee shop, you might switch from your usual voice output communication to visually showing the barista your device's screen. I definitely tend towards doing this if I think someone won't be able to hear me. During the migraine or sensory overwhelm, if you can't tolerate the bright light of your device or even a bedside lamp to illuminate your letterboard, you could squeeze or tap your communication partner's hands in the dark to indicate yes and no with partner-assisted scanning. When going to a meeting or giving a presentation, you might use a secondary app that isn't your favorite for daily use, but is better at saving long-prepared sentences or paragraphs. I usually use Proloquo for text for presentations like this mainly because of this feature. If you're going to a doctor appointment or another situation that you're worried your competence could be questioned in, you might decide to switch to a typing-based app in order to blend in with able norms more closely. I have had doctors do things like talk to my support person like I don't understand, or ask whether I'm allowed to sign informed consent forms for myself if I'm using symbols-based AAC, but I know they're likely to take me more seriously if I type. I can't always make that trade-off, and of course I shouldn't have to, but it can be an option. And you want to use the tablet that's your usual communication device to watch a movie, work on homework, or play a game for a while, you might switch to a letterboard for the duration of the other activity. I either do this or use sign language while my support staff and I are cooking, because my device usually is a recipe pulled up. Sometimes you need to stand opposite or sit across from your communication partner, such as when talking over a high counter to a cashier, so you might choose a different letterboard than usual that uses bigger letters, different color coding, or other features that make it easier to navigate upside down. If you usually use a communication device, but it's difficult for callers to hear over speakerphone, your backup AAC method for phone calls might be text relay, where an operator reads your typed words aloud to the caller. Some people think this service is only meant for deaf and hard of hearing callers, but people with speech-related disabilities can use it too. If the person who usually reads your letterboarding isn't available, you might use grunts and pointing to communicate with other listeners. Not everyone is comfortable letterboarding with unfamiliar people. We might need a certain communication partner or a support person to be able to letterboard successfully. Stimming can be another way of communicating in this situation too, although fellow neurodivergent people are usually more likely to understand stimming as communication than the average neurotypical person is. When the glare from sunlight or overhead lighting is making it difficult to use your eye gaze device, you might switch to a simple yes and no system with your communication partner by using the general direction of your eye gaze. I've met one person who uses a brief upward gaze to indicate yes whenever their eye gaze device isn't able to operate well. When you're having a particularly hard time with motor planning or physical fatigue, you might switch from direct selection to switch scanning. One of my apps is an option in the settings where you can turn your whole screen into the switch, so I don't need special external hardware. But if you are curious whether a switch would be a good option for you and your app doesn't offer this feature as a built-in function, I recommend looking for a local lending library of equipment for people with disabilities to see if you can try out some hardware to see if it works well for you. As you can see, the situations and determining factors that impact what AAC backup you might want to choose are almost endless. If you come away from this session with a single take-home message, I hope it is this: always assume you will need a backup, and even a backup for your backup. Bring them with you everywhere if at all possible. This includes extra chargers and battery packs for those of you who use high-tech devices. Always plan to have more electricity than you're likely to need. Don't forget that rechargeable battery packs do have to be charged intermittently because they can gradually lose power over time even when not in use. Also, I touched on this a little before, but try to practice using your backups even in situations you don't need them. This will make them easier to utilize when they're the only things you can rely on in an emergent situation. For example, I regularly make a point to use my primary letterboard for running errands even when my device is also available, because it means I'm that much more comfortable with it when it's the only option, such as when hospitals take my device away from me. I talked about this briefly earlier too, but a big part of thinking about backups is expanding your understanding of what can be considered AAC. I have a friend who joked that my huge collection of special interest-related t-shirts is one of my forms of AAC, because each shirt tells people what I'm about without me needing to use speech to explain myself. They're a way to tell people I'm autistic, or queer, or a fan of Harry Potter, with just words or images printed on fabric. If I'm getting dressed in the morning, I may as well choose something communicative, right? Maybe you're not into t-shirts, but I hope the following list of potential backups give you a new appreciation for how many different kinds of non-spoken communication methods there really are in the world. The first list I'll give you is a lot of ideas for wearable and otherwise very portable backups for when you're on the go. Please note that I'm not trying to advertise any specific brand in the links provided below. I just want you to be able to see examples of the possibilities that are out there. If you're considering purchasing something to use as an AAC backup, do your research in order to choose between the sellers available. If you're considering crafting something to use as an AAC backup, do your research to see how others have created similar items. First of all, for partner-assisted scanning, you don't need any physical objects at all, just another person who can provide options auditory or in sign language. This is a great backup method of communication for people who are currently having a really hard time with motor control or physical fatigue, because you can use as little as one small muscle movement to indicate a positive response when your communication partner says the option you want to select. I have friends who frequently use their head or eye gaze to select options when their devices are broken. Their support staff might say 2 options, holding up a fist for each in opposite locations, and the AAC user can turn their heads or eyes towards the one they want to select. Another acquaintance of mine can stick out their tongue slightly to select an option or indicate yes. With a skilled communication partner, these methods can lead to a huge range of self-expression, and if you're a support person for an AAC user, I encourage you to learn as much as you can about how you can support a robust communication using partner-assisted scanning. Another potential backup method that doesn't require any physical objects is expressive sign language, modified signs, or home signs. I don't recommend using signed English or other gestural systems that are based on spoken grammar, because learning even a little bit of an actual sign language like ASL, including exposure to deaf cultural norms, will lead to greater potential for connections with sign language communities across the lifespan. It also provides a better chance of access to interpreters who will understand you accurately as a communication support. For example, I often use interpreters for medical appointments. ASL or whatever your local sign language is can be a great backup AAC method. If you have motor skills impairments, you might be able to learn modified signs that fit your abilities, and there are still interpreters who are skilled at understanding those. For AAC users who are certain they really only want to be able to communicate with their immediate family or caregivers, home signs or idiosyncratic gestures are another option for a backup method. Sometimes non-speaking people will develop these kind of home signs independently, so if you notice someone you know using the same gesture over and over, try to figure out what it means. It's entirely possible it's a stim, but it could be communicative. Those are the non-tangible forms of AAC I recommend for backup methods, but there are almost endless objects you can use as communication supports to back up your primary AAC method too. I'll go over my favorite ideas. Know that a lot of these can also be used for partner-assisted scanning with aided visual input, where your support person points to each option as they list it and wait for you to select the one you want. Visual partner-assisted scanning is a great way for non-speaking people to communicate with each other too. For example, a few months ago when both me and my friend's devices weren't available, I used a letterboard both to direct select what I wanted to say where my friend could see it and to use my finger to indicate each letter for them to select the ones that spelled out their messages. It was slow, but it was honestly lovely to be able to have a direct conversation together without needing fancy tech or speaking people to intervene. If you like to handwrite, you can wear a miniature notebook and pen, or whiteboard and pen, around your neck or clipped to your shirt or belt. This can be homemade with dollar store materials or a pre-made set purchased online like this one designed for nurses. If you almost always have your device with you but want to prepare for when it runs out of batteries, you can keep a small letterboard taped to the back of it or tuck one into its holster. Here is a link to a simple letterboard I designed that you just need to shrink or expand to your ideal size before printing. I definitely recommend laminating the printout so that it holds up over time. Well, I recommend laminating pretty much everything. Even if your typical style isn't exactly spooky, an Ouija board shirt or pillow conveniently doubles as a letterboard. Or this is even more niche, but if you're a fan of the Netflix series Stranger Things, look for merchandise that displays Joyce's string lights alphabet wall. You can attach a luggage tag that is printed with letters or important symbols to a keychain or lanyard. Sometimes there are things like this pre-made online, or you can print your own designs at home and seal them on both sides of an old gift card with a sturdy glue or tape, punching a hole for the attachment. Here's one I made. I recommend taping over the entire card with packing tape before punching the hole in order to provide a sort of homemade waterproofing. You can fit more than one of these on a single lanyard or keychain. If you want to increase the vocabulary you can fit on it. Some companies custom print snap bracelets, or if you're a seamstress, you can hand embroider a fabric bracelet with symbols and words for a wearable and washable option. I have made several of these for myself and friends, and they're really handy, especially for quick interactions. Velcro fastenings provide the best adjustable sizing and are easier to operate than clasps for those of us with fine motor skills problems. Another option for a homemade bracelet is to attach a small laminated symbols board to the cuff of an old sock. Football playbook wrist cuffs offer plastic sleeves you can insert your own letterboard or symbols board into. Here's a picture of mine. It's not perfectly waterproof, but holds up decently as it's designed for outdoor use. If you're someone that always has your phone in your pocket, a free or low-cost app like Speech Assistant could be handier for a quick conversation than getting out a bigger device. My phone doesn't have great volume, but I frequently hold it out for a communication partner to read in circumstances like running errands or talking to neighbors. A sturdy plastic alphabet stencil or letterboard can be attached to your backpack with a carabiner. Here's an example of my friends. There are companies that custom print bandanas you could design with symbols or words tailored to your communication needs. I haven't tried this, but I'm working on embroidering a letterboard that will be similarly foldable, washable, and hardy. You can buy pre-made sets of communication cards on keyrings, but I recommend printing and laminating your own in order to choose vocabulary that is going to be most useful to you. This picture is one I made for when I travel. It's useful to have something with me while my iPad has to go through the X-ray machine, in case I need to say anything to TSA agents. Again, I laminated with packing tape as a cheap alternative to paying for lamination at an office supplies store. For blind and low vision AAC users, one wearable option I saw online is a belt with braille cards for different words. For folks not fluent in braille, you could use raised line drawings. This would be great for AAC users who primarily use a tactile-based communication device, but temporarily don't have access to it. Alphabet beads can be strung between spacer beads in order to make a necklace that's right there for you when your letterboard isn't handy. This would be best for folks who have good fine motor skills. A medical alert bracelet is another form of AAC. If you currently have no access to other methods, holding it out to somebody and pointing is a way to disclose that you're not speaking. which can be helpful in emergencies or even in everyday situations where someone doesn't understand why you're not responding to them as expected. I also use mine to refer emergency medical staff to the full info sheet I keep in my wallet. Status badges can communicate all sorts of things about your present state of mind. You can choose a certain one to wear on your shirt until it's no longer needed, or keep a second keychain weapon or a foldable piece of fabric with you at all times so that you can point to relevant ones as needed. One option is using the red, yellow, and green communication badge system that the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network recommends, but you can also purchase or make more specific messages indicating to people around you what you're coping with or what you need. Here are some I've made. Other buttons and pins are forms of communication too. One example common in queer circles is pronoun pins that tell people around you what gender pronouns you go by. I wear these on my backpack and hat so that I don't constantly have to find the right folder in my device to tell people they're referring to me incorrectly. Okay, that was a long list of wearable and portable backup methods. Do you have any other ideas in this category? Feel free to add your thoughts to the chat while I continue. I want to transition now into talking through ways you can integrate AAC backups into your environment so that even if you're not wearing or carrying something with you, you're never left without a way to communicate. Some of these require that you have a fair amount of say over your own living space and work or school environment, so this is a good opportunity to practice self-advocacy skills around your access to communication supports. Please seek out support from other disabled activists or disability legal organizations if you encounter resistance from the people who control the environment you want to add AAC backups to. You have the right to have access to whatever communication methods you want at all times, not just your primary method when it's most convenient for speaking people. It's worth mentioning that any of you who are not AAC users should feel free to use any of these ideas solely as models too, not putting pressure on the AAC user you're supporting to use them in return. There's value in consistently demonstrating what symbols are connected to what letters are connected to what sounds, regardless of whether the AAC user ever chooses to use that exact communication support to express themselves. Many of us need visual input in order to understand you well, and we need to see that it's okay to switch between different communication methods. So utilizing any of these ideas as a conversation partner is worthwhile whether or not we end up preferring the same methods. So let's talk about communication supports you can integrate into your environment. One of the benefits of working backup AAC methods into your living spaces is that they can make communication quicker due to the fact that they're designed for that environment. For example, to say, stove on high. In my device, I have to navigate through various subfolders with 9 button presses. But if I have a chart listing the different settings posted near the stove, all I have to do to confirm with my support staff what I'm supposed to do next is point to the chart symbol labeled high. Again, a lot of the ideas listed here will sound like direct selection, but almost any of them can be used with partner-assisted scanning instead, or head-mounted laser pointers for folks who have more control over their head movements than their hands or feet. Personally, most of my environmental AAC is in my kitchen, because that's where I most frequently need to communicate with my support staff. We have a letterboard taped to the microwave and a symbol strap taped to the counter. Or when I lived with roommates, we had a giant whiteboard in the kitchen for announcements and phone messages, but that I ended up using as AAC sometimes. Another option is to use magnetic letters or words on your fridge. In the dining room, you could put a custom placemat at the dinner table or high chair, or use a stack of passable communication cards with fringe vocabulary specific to mealtime. As noted earlier, cooking and eating is a time you might want to set your device aside to avoid mess, so these are settings you might especially want to use backups in. Okay, most of the rest of these ideas I don't have personal experience using, but I think some will be helpful to you, so I'm just going to talk about them in the abstract. In your living room, try placing a strip with pictures of favorite characters at the bottom of your television, or taped to the remote control, so you can pick out what movie you want to watch. Another idea is to put pictures of different kinds of Lego structures on the outside of the toy bin, so that AAC users can tell their playmates what they want to build next. If you want access to core vocab on the same support, you can add words like watch, play, build, want, next, and all done to these. For families and people who share a bedroom, it's a great idea to keep a giant letterboard with core words on the bedroom wall. You can keep a laser pointer on your bedside table for when you want to chat when you're supposed to be asleep, like JJ uses in the show Speechless. Another good option for when you're supposed to be asleep, or just when you can't cope with bright lights, is a letterboard made from glow-in-the-dark puff paint. An additional option for bedroom AAC is to put symbols for clothing items in different colors on the outside of the closet door or dresser to encourage self-determination during dressing. If you have a bookshelf in your room but can't reach all the shelves, have a strip of book cover images low down for when you want to request a certain story. Having AAC backups in the bathroom is particularly important for folks who need support people with them there, and it's another situation you might want to avoid using a primary communication device if you're worried about water exposure. So one option is the laminated symbols board in the shower featuring friends' words for bathing. For folks with some handwriting skills, so crayons and lit up are easy to clean up later. And a small communication board near your toilet or changing table that includes words like stop, no, and do it myself can encourage bodily autonomy and consent. Even those of us who usually wear our primary AAC method on a strap or harness might not want to lug it around during playtime in the yard, so here's a few ideas for outdoor backups. First, you can keep sidewalk chalk on the patio for writing and drawing messages. If you have play equipment, affix several well-laminated communication cards to the chains on the swing set using K-rings, or tape symbols for vocabulary like up, down, again, now, and all done to the side of a slide. If you have a pool or hot tub, use zip ties to wrap a laminated letterboard around a foam pool noodle or inflatable inner tube. Maybe a lot of you work in schools or attend school, so let's talk about environmental accommodations to support communication in that setting. First of all, picture schedules or visual task lists you might already be using can double as AAC, because they're a handy way to indicate which activity you want to talk about or begin doing. I use ASL-based facial expressions while I point to my cooking task list with my support staff to indicate, okay, shall we do this next? It can be a lot less labor-intensive to just point to something right there on the wall than finding the right buttons in my device. Yes, of course it's good to practice knowing where the buttons are in my device too for situations I'm not standing right next to a certain environmental support. But if multiple button presses can be fatiguing for you, it's more important to have backup options available that will make communication as easy as possible at times you're too overwhelmed to navigate between folders or spell out a full word. Oh, note that for some of us we'd rather use a visual schedule that incorporates the symbol system we are also using on our devices or communication boards. So if you're creating new visual supports like picture schedules, I recommend using screenshots from your device to help design each item. Some other ideas for AAC backups worked into the school environment are: try to get the school to place a giant board on the playground with core and friends symbols for anyone to use. In the cafeteria, ask kitchen staff to post pictures of each day's food options somewhere reachable for AAC users to point to their choices. On a more individual basis, you can tape a core word board or letterboard to your desk to use with your assistant or friends you sit nearby. For AAC users who like to handwrite, having a large whiteboard on one wall and getting preferential seating right next to it can be a communication support. If you like to use a laser pointer on a head mount, ask for a large core words board or letterboard to be placed on the wall opposite your desk. And if you struggle with being able to keep your hand raised, you can place a single battery-operated button at your desk that plays a recording of the words, "I have something to say," in order to get the teacher's attention. There are also ways to integrate backup AAC methods into a work or volunteer environment. If you have a desk or workstation, you can make a flipbook-style sign propped up next to you that features rotatable messages displaying your current ability to engage with coworkers, similar to status badges. Another light tech support would be having a small talk communication board on the wall near whatever serves as the metaphorical water cooler at your workplace, the spot people tend to stand around and chat. Then there's the technological end of workplace backups. Many of us who use voice output devices find it difficult to integrate them into slideshow presentations and video chat meetings. Ask for access to slideshow software that automatically generates pre-programmed voice output each time you pull up the corresponding slide, and access to web conferencing programs that allow simultaneous participation via chatbots rather than webcam only. These environmental supports only work if you're actually allowed to use them, so talk to your HR department about appropriate policies that support your inclusion. Have you ever been in a car or a school bus or on a bike when you needed to say something, but there was no way to use your primary AAC method? This is common. A lot of people remove their device from their wheelchair mount during transit, or the other passengers can't hear their voice output over the road noise, or there's no way for the driver or a fellow bicyclist to read their usual letterboarding, and all sorts of other barriers. Here are a few ideas. If you're going to be in the backseat of a car or a school bus, or there will be other passengers who can give their visual attention, use zip ties or Velcro to attach a letterboard to the back of the seat in front of you. If you're usually the driver or front seat passenger, affix a few different battery-operated buttons to the dashboard that play single voice recordings of your choice for important messages like "I need to go to the bathroom now" or "I'm lost." If you're bicycling with a friend, place a bell on your bike and pre-establish a system for using it to signal yes and no to your communication partner's spoken questions. For example, 1 ring for yes and 2 for no. And for that matter, Morse code could be an option too if you want to get really fancy with the bell. Okay, if you have other ideas for backup AAC methods that can be incorporated into your environment, go ahead and share those with each other now in the chat. I just want to touch on a couple more general sentiments before we move into the question and answer period. First, if you're an AAC user, I encourage you to think about how your choice of communication method in and of itself can be communicative. For example, when I'm around emerging communicators, I might make a point to use AAC rather than speech in order to convey that their communication methods are normal and wonderful too. When I'm in a situation where I really need to convey that I have high support needs in a certain domain, I might use symbols-based AAC rather than typing because I know how most people judge that. Conversely, in situations where I desperately need to convey my competence, I might give in and use speech as my backup, because I also know how most people judge that. Of course, it's messed up that I have to code switch like this in order to be respected and get my needs met, but if I'm willing to do it, it can serve its purpose. More happily, while there are certainly situations where it's not safe or possible, sometimes I want to make an intentional choice about what AAC method I use in order to convey disability pride. Every time I use AAC, especially more stigmatized methods, I am proclaiming to everyone around me that being noticeably disabled is okay. That is communication, and there's joy in it. Secondly, and this thought was prompted by one of the Facebook polls I mentioned earlier, thank you to folks who responded to that, is that some of us find that incorporating what we might originally think of as backup AAC methods into our life might end up changing what we consider our primary communication methods, or even break down the distinction between primary methods and backup methods completely. For some people, all their AAC methods are equally essential to full communication, and the best priority to focus on is just increasing the consistent availability of every single one so that they always have flexibility to choose what's appropriate in each moment. Personally, what I consider my primary versus backup AAC methods have definitely changed over time as I've experimented and gotten familiar with them, and I'm now proud most of all that I am a confident multimodal communicator. As you explore backups to what you might currently consider your primary method, you might discover the same thing. You could end up with much more robust and comfortable communication overall than you currently have access to. Okay, just to reiterate my main points, always assume you will need a backup for your primary AAC method, and even a backup for your backup. Think carefully about why you might want to use a backup rather than your primary method in a variety of situations, and use those factors to help you plan ahead. Integrate as many AAC backups into your living environments as possible, and create wearable or other highly portable methods you can bring with you anywhere. Remember that for many AAC users, partner-assisted scanning is one of the most portable, easy to utilize off-the-cuff strategies, but you need to practice it by working closely with the AAC user in order to get good at being a communication partner that can actually convey what we mean. Also, definitely consider sign language an option for a fast, portable AAC method that has the potential to connect you to a rich cultural community, and access to interpreters as an accommodation. If you're going to learn sign, please seek out classes taught by deaf people and deaf-created resources for independent study. For any of these options, if you're a support person for an AAC user, don't forget to use our backup methods to communicate with us too. We need to see all our AAC being used on a regular basis to become good at multimodal communication. What's great is the backup methods are often easy to duplicate copies of, so that you are able to model without taking away our voices. Finally, get creative. The best way to find backup AAC methods that will work for you is to think out of the box about what counts as AAC, to use as AAC, and what the nature of communication even is. Okay, I think we have some time left for questions. Moderator, can you look through the chat box and read any questions aloud, please? You'll just have to be patient while I type.
All right. Well, this one's a tough one for me because there's a lot of chat. People love your presentation. Does anybody have any specific questions or things they want to comment for Endever? Let's see. I understand it's important that primary versus backup can be fluid or multimodal with young children still learning. Is it appropriate to reinforce some of these low-tech ideas with their AAC device? For example, if we had environmental methods in the playroom and my son asks for Legos by pointing to a picture of Legos on the toy closet, can we model on his iPad with LAMP? So basically to respond, is it okay to model if he's pointing directly to the Legos to help him get to know his stuff? That's a great question, actually. And I will say that Endever said that they'll go through and answer a lot of these too if they run out of time. So feel free to continue to ask.
Would accept his first communication no matter what methods he picks, but you could always choose to use a device to respond to what he said.
Yeah, that's great. Just Yeah, so basically don't say, we don't understand, use your device, but to respond, I think that's great. All right. Thoughts about on how to select, try, introduce backups if a student cannot yet provide feedback or input. Any ideas where to start?
Group starts with one or two options that use similar vocabulary as they are used to on their primary method, and model all of them consistently. The ones they start to use and show interest in will be a sort of natural feedback.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, let's see. Okay, so Dina asked a question and it did have a response as well. So I'm going to read both to you and see if you want to add on to it. Dina says, I think we tend to mirror um, or prioritize the communication method used by our communication partners. Do you think using printed displays results in fewer interaction using voice in fewer interactions using voice output methods? Then, yeah, I messed that one up. Do you think using printed displays are going to result in fewer interactions than using voiced interaction? And I will tell you one answer here, and you can just say add to it. Alyssa said, I'm not convinced that I care if it does. Not all AAC users prefer voice output methods, which is actually an excellent answer. And for those that are still typing in questions, please continue to ask. I think this session is going to end soon, but as I mentioned, Endever is going to be happy to go through and continue to answer your questions there. So don't don't quit typing in just because the session's going to end.
Yes, I agree. You need to question why you think one kind of method is more desirable. Speaking people often favor voice output because it is most similar to them, but there's nothing inherently better about it.
That makes sense. All right, so you have a few more questions in there, as I mentioned, but time is up. This was fantastic. You really need to go through and read all of the thoughts and things in the Slack channel because people really enjoyed this. We once again want to thank Endever for talking about backups and backups to backups. These are things we don't even think
Having
about.
me.
And we hope you'll enjoy the rest of the conference. And thanks again